Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie, Hook in English, then you must like this video if you are visiting our channel for the first time. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Friends, in today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called Hook. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I'm going to tell you, I'm also going to give you all the information on which OT platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film storyline, star cast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the ends. So let's start the video. Hook is a 1991 American fantasy adventure film directed by Steven Spielberg and written by James V. Hart and Malia Scotch-Marmo. It stars Robin Williams as Peter Banning, Peter Pan, Dustin Hoffman as Captain Hook, Julia Roberts as Tinker Bell, Bob Hoskins as Mr. Smee, Maggie Smith as Granny Wendy, and Charlie Corsmo as Jack Banning. It serves as a sequel in a modern-day setting to J.M. Barrie's 1911 novel Peter and Wendy, focusing on an adult Peter Pan who has forgotten his childhood due to his high-powered lifestyle. In his new life, he is known as Peter Banning, a successful but career-minded lawyer who neglects his wife, Wendy's granddaughter, and their two children. However, when his old archenemy, Captain Hook, kidnaps his children, he returns to Neverland to save them. Along the journey, he reclaims the memories of his past and develops full emotional maturity. Spielberg began developing Hook in the early 1980s with Walt Disney Productions and Paramount Pictures. It would have followed the Peter Pan storyline seen in the 1924 silent film and 1953 animated Disney film. It entered pre-production in 1985, but Spielberg abandoned the project. Hart developed the script with director Nick Castle and TriStar Pictures before Spielberg decided to direct in 1989. It was shot almost entirely on sound stages at Sony Picture Studios in Culver City, California. Released on December 11, 1991, Hook received mixed reviews from critics who praised the performances, particularly those of Williams and Hoffman, John Williams' musical score, and the film's production values, but criticized the screenplay and tone. The film also received 5 nominations at the 64th Academy Awards. Although the film was a commercial success and became the 4th highest-grossing film of 1991, it failed to meet the studio's expectations. Since its release, Hook gained a strong cult following, and it is considered by many to be a cult classic. Plot: Peter Banning, a workaholic lawyer fixated on success, has a strained relationship with his wife, Maura, and their children, 11-year-old Jack and 7-year-old Maggie, due to his constant absences and broken promises. During Christmas, the family travels to London to visit Maura's grandmother, Wendy Darling, who cared for Peter as an orphan. When Peter loses his temper with the children for interrupting a work call, Maura scolds him, reminding him how fleeting their time with the children is. During a dinner honoring Wendy's work with orphans, the children stay home with her old friend, Toodles, and housekeeper, Liza. Returning from the event, Peter and Moira discover the children are missing, with a note left behind signed by Captain James Hook. Wendy urges Peter to return to Neverland and rescue his children because he is Peter Pan. Having no memory of his childhood, Peter does not believe her until the fairy Tinker Bell arrives and flies him to Neverland. In the pirate town, Peter confronts Hook, who fails to recognize his once formidable rival. Hook challenges Peter to fly and save his children, but Peter fails. Dismayed at how pathetic Peter has become, Hook orders his execution. But Tinker Bell convinces him to give her 3 days to train Peter for their final battle. Peter is brought to the Lost Boys' hideout, now led by Rufio. They mock the grown man before them until the group ultimately recognizes him. They begin training Peter, urging him to abandon his uptight adult demeanor and embrace his imagination. Meanwhile, Hook's first mate, Smee, suggests turning Peter's children against him. Maggie resists, but Jack, hurt by Peter's broken promises and failure to save him, begins to side with Hook. While infiltrating the pirate town, Peter sees Jack playing in a baseball game organized by Hook, who has taken on a fatherly role. Devastated, Peter returns to the Lost Boys camp with renewed determination. His shadow leads him to the ruins of Wendy's house, where he remembers his past. As an infant in the early 1900s, he ran away from his mother, fearing growing up and dying, and was brought to Neverland by Tinker Bell. Visiting his family later, he found they had a new child and assumed they had forgotten him. Peter met Wendy, who fell in love with him, but as she aged and started a family, Peter fell for her granddaughter, Moira, and remained with her. Recalling Jack's birth as his happiest memory, Peter regains his powers and ability to fly. That night, a heartbroken Tinker Bell confesses her unrequited love to Peter. The next day, Peter and the Lost Boys launch an attack on the pirates. While Peter rescues Maggie, Rufio is fatally wounded in a duel with Hook. Witnessing Rufio's dying wish for a father like Peter, Jack reconciles with his father. Peter prepares to leave Neverland with his children, but Hook demands a final battle, vowing to eternally stalk Peter's descendants if denied. With help from Tinker Bell and the Lost Boys, Peter subdues Hook, who feigns surrender. Hook tries to stab Peter, but misses and impales the taxidermied crocodile that once ate his hand. The crocodile appears to come to life, topples over, and consumes Hook. Tinker Bell then returns Jack and Maggie home, while Peter bids farewell to the Lost Boys, appointing Thudbutt as their new leader. Thudbutt gives Peter a bag of marbles that belong to Toodles, a former Lost Boy. Peter awakens in London, where Tinker Bell tearfully bids him farewell. Transformed by his journey, Peter joyfully reunites with his family and discards his work phone. He returns the bag to Toodles, who sprinkles the pixie dust within on himself and flies off to Neverland. When Wendy observes that Peter's adventures are over, he replies, "To live will be an awfully big adventure." Cast Robin Williams as Peter Banning Peter Pan, Ryan Francis as the 8-year-old Peter Pan, Max Hoffman as the young Peter Pan, Matthew Van Ginkel as baby Peter Pan, Dustin Hoffman as Captain James Hook. Hoffman also voices the Pan Am pilot's announcement as a nod to the dual role element of Captain Hook and George Darling in the original play. Julia Roberts as Tinker Bell. Lisa Wilhoit as Tinker Bell in a flashback in which Peter is a baby. Bob Hoskins as William Smee. Hoskins also portrays a street sweeper at Kensington Gardens. Maggie Smith as Wendy Darling. Gwyneth Paltrow as the teenage Wendy Darling. Charlie Corsmo as Jack Banning, Peter and Moira's son. Amber Scott as Maggie Banning, Peter and Moira's daughter. Caroline Goodall as Moira Banning, Peter's wife, Jack and Maggie's mother, and Wendy's granddaughter. Jeffrey Lower as Brad, Peter's co-worker. Kelly Rowan as Peter's mother. Dante Bosco as Rufio, the leader of the Lost Boys. Jason Fisher as Ace. Raushan Hammond as Thudbutt. Isaiah Robinson as Pockets. James Madio as Don't Ask. Arthur Mollett as Toodles. Laurel Cronin as Liza, Granny Wendy's maid. Phil Collins as Inspector Good. Alex Zuckerman as Latchboy. Thomas Tulloch as Too Small. Ahmad Stoner as No Nap. Nick Tate as Noodler. In addition, a number of celebrities and family members made brief credited and uncredited cameos in the film. Musicians David Crosby and Jimmy Buffett, actress Glenn Close, and former boxer Tony Burton appear as members of Hook's pirate crew. Star Wars creator George Lucas and actress Carrie Fisher play the kissing couple sprinkled with pixie dust. Two of Hoffman's children, Jacob and Rebecca, both under 10 years old during filming, briefly appear in scenes in the normal world, and screenwriter Jim Hart's 11-year-old son Jake, who years earlier inspired his father with the question, "What if Peter Pan grew up?" plays one of Peter's Lost Boys. Production. Inspiration. Steven Spielberg found a close personal connection to Peter Pan's story from his own childhood. The troubled relationship between Peter Banning and his son Jack in the film echoed Spielberg's relationship with his own father Arnold. Previous Spielberg films that explored a dysfunctional father-son relationship included E.T. the Extraterrestrial and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Peter's quest for success paralleled Spielberg starting out as a film director and transforming into a Hollywood business magnate. I think a lot of people today are losing their imagination because they are work-driven. They are so self-involved with work and success and arriving at the next plateau that children and family almost become incidental. I have even experienced it myself when I have been on a very tough shoot and I've not seen my kids except on weekends. They ask for my time and I can't give it to them because I'm working. Like Peter at the beginning of the film, Spielberg has a fear of flying. He feels that Peter's enduring quality in the storyline is simply to fly. Anytime anything flies, whether it's Superman, Batman, or E.T., it's got to be a tip of the hat to Peter Pan, Spielberg reflected in a 1992 interview. Peter Pan was the first time I saw anybody fly. Before I saw Superman, before I saw Batman, and of course before I saw any superheroes, my first memory of anybody flying is in Peter Pan Reception. Box office. Spielberg, Williams, and Hoffman did not take salaries for Hook. Their deal called for them to split 40% of TriStar Pictures' gross revenues. They were to receive $20 million from the first $50 million in gross theatrical film rentals, with TriStar keeping the next $70 million in rentals before the three resumed receiving their percentage. Hook was released in North America December 11, 1991, earning $13.5 million in its opening weekend. It went on to gross $119.7 million in the United States and Canada and $181.2 million in foreign countries, accumulating a worldwide total of $300.9 million. It is the sixth highest grossing pirate-themed film, behind all 5 films in the Pirates of the Caribbean film series, 36. In the United States and Canada, it was the 6th highest grossing film in 1991 and 4th highest grossing worldwide. It was the 2nd highest grossing film in Japan, with theatrical rentals of $22.4 million. It ended up making a profit of $50 million for the studio, yet it was still declared a financial disappointment, having been overshadowed by the release of Disney's Beauty and the Beast, and a decline in box office receipts compared to the previous years. The ads for Steven Spielberg's Hook asked the question, what if Peter Pan grew up? But the answer, alas, is that then he would probably star in a lugubrious retread of a once magical idea. A movie very much like this one, in which Peter Banning is a busy executive with more time for his cellular phone than for his children, until fate launches him back once again into combat with Captain Hook. Robin Williams plays the harassed businessman, and Maggie Smith is the old granny who's able to suggest the most wonderful possibilities when she whispers, "Peter, dear, don't you know who you are?" Actually, he can't remember a thing that happened before he was 12, but Hook can, and kidnaps Banning's 2 children because he wants to lure Peter back to Neverland for a rematch. The sad thing about the screenplay for Hook is that it's so correctly titled. This whole construction is really nothing more than a hook on which to hang a new version of the Peter Pan story. No effort is made to involve Peter's magic in the changed world he now inhabits, and little thought has been given to Captain Hook's extraordinary persistence in wanting to revisit the events of the past. The opening of the film promises more. Spielberg sets the scene in modern-day America, where the executive lifestyle leaves no time for fathers to spend with children. Then Robin Williams takes his wife and children back to London to visit Granny Wendy, who adopted him as an orphan, and as the kids sleep in the very same bedroom where the original story began, we get the Spielberg visual trademark of the blinding light on the other side of the rattling window. The promise of magic just outside. After the children disappear and Peter finds Hook's kidnap note and is told by Granny Wendy who he really is and why he must follow, I was poised for a breathtaking first view of Neverland, but what I got was a dreary disappointment. The long Neverland sequences take place in a cluttered rag-and-bone shop of art direction. There are too many characters, too many props, too many signs, too many costumes, bad traffic direction, and no sense of place or space. The whole thing looks like what it is, a movie set, right down to the unconvincing backdrops, and for some reason there's a shift to red and brown in the color spectrum, so Neverland, which in my imagination at least, is on a lush green island, looks as if it's in the midst of a drought. The other key characters appear. Hook, played by Dustin Hoffman as if he were doing an imitation instead of a performance, and Tinker Bell, played by Julia Roberts more as a duty than a pleasure. There's not much wit here. What exists is supplied by Robin Williams, who does the best he can to be amazed and enchanted by his shabby surroundings, and by Smee, Bob Hoskins, who is sort of Hook's official sidekick. There's also a large group of orphans in Neverland who are masked as if for group photographs and shunted here and there as if waiting for auditions for Oliver. The crucial failure in Hook is its inability to reimagine the material, to find something new, fresh, or urgent to do with the Peter Pan myth. Lacking that, Spielberg should simply have remade the original story straight for this generation. The lack of creativity in the screenplay is dramatized in the sword-fighting sequences between Hook and Peter, which are endless and not particularly well choreographed. They do not convince me that either Williams or Hoffman is much of a fencer. Has any Hollywood director ever given thought to bringing in a Hong Kong expert like King Hu to do second unit work on the sword fights? The cheapest Asian martial arts movie has infinitely more excitement in its sword sequences than the repetitive lunge and shuffle that goes on here. Then comes the ending of the movie, or the endings, one after another. Farewells. Poignancy. Lessons to be learned, speeches to be made, lost marbles to be rediscovered, tears to be shed. The conclusion of Hook would be embarrassingly excessive, even for a movie in which something of substance had gone before. Here we get the uncanny suspicion that Hook was written and directed according to the famous recipe of the country preacher who told the folks what he was going to tell them, and then told them what he had told them. Hook feels as much like a massive amusement park ride as it does a film. Spirited, rambunctious, often messy and undisciplined, this determined attempt to recast the Peter Pan story in contempo terms, from a screen story by Jim V. Hart and Nick Castle from J.M. Barrie's Play and Books, splashes every bit of its mega budget between $60 million and $80 million onto the screen. Screenplay sends a modern, grown-up Peter, a man who has forgotten his youth, back to Neverland to rescue his children from the clutches of the ever-vengeful Captain Hook. Setup is deftly done, sweeping the viewer right into the world of the Banning family. Peter, Robin Williams, is a workaholic corporate attorney, but he manages to tear himself away to take his wife Moira, Caroline Goodall, and children Jack, Charlie Corsmo, and Maggie, Amber Scott, to London to visit Granny Wendy, Maggie Smith. Back in Blighty, Jack and Maggie are spirited away, courtesy of Captain James Hook. Mystified, Peter is visited by Tinker Bell, Julia Roberts, and 36 minutes into the story is transported to Neverland, where Hook, Dustin Hoffman, lords over a raucous pirate town from the deck of his enormous ship. Sweet and likable through the first half hour, Pick becomes dominated by a vaudeville tone and in-jokes during the pirate section. Glenn Close turns up in a male disguise as a sailor, victimized by Hook. Despite the cascade of wondrous special effects, massive battles between the kids and pirates, and face-offs between Pan and Hook, the film doesn't truly take flight. Jokiness gets the better of both Hoffman and Bob Hoskins, who plays the captain's loyal hand, Smee. Williams inhabits the main role splendidly, but the standout supporting turns come from Smith, perfect as the aged Wendy, and Goodall. 1991, nominations: Best Art Direction, Costume Design, Song, When You're Alone, Makeup, Visual Effects. If we want to talk about influences, then of course the biggest one is J.M. Barrie's original work, Peter Pan, or The Boy Who Wouldn't Grow Up. First performed as a play in 1904 and later turned into a novel in 1911. Barrie's story was already packed with complex themes, mortality, memory, motherhood, and the bittersweet nature of growing up. But in the original, Peter never grows up. That's kind of the point. Spielberg and the screenwriters flipped that completely. What if Peter did grow up? What if Neverland was something you could leave and forget? So in a way, Hook acts as a spiritual sequel to Barrie's work. It assumes the audience is already familiar with the Peter Pan mythos and builds on it like a what-if scenario turned into a full-blown big-budget story. This angle isn't unique to Hook either. Literature and film have long used the childhood legend revisited through adult eyes. trick. Think Return to Oz, Christopher Robin, or even Finding Neverland, which came later but dealt directly with Barry's life and inspirations. In terms of cinematic influences, you can absolutely feel echoes of Spielberg's earlier work. For instance, E.T. 1982 was about reconnecting with wonder through the eyes of a child, and it treated its young characters with real emotional. Hook does something similar, but flips the lens. Now it's the adult who's out of sync, emotionally disconnected, and in desperate need of that spark. And then you've got movies, like The Wizard of Oz, 1939, which obviously paved the way for so many fantasy adventures that feature a real-world character getting transported into a magical land. Neverland in Hook functions like Oz in many ways. It's both a physical place and a reflection of what's going on inside the main character's mind. Peter doesn't just visit Neverland. He has to mentally and emotionally break free from his grown-up cynicism to access it. You could also argue that Hook has some DNA in common with more modernist takes on fairy tales like Labyrinth 1986 or The Neverending Story 1984, which both explore how fantasy worlds can represent psychological states. In Hook, Neverland isn't just magical. It's a metaphor. It reflects who Peter was, what he forgot, and the emotional work he needs to do to reconnect with his kids and with himself. Now, when it comes to how Hook handles genre expectations, this is where things get complicated. On one hand, it gives you all the fantasy beats you'd expect. Dramatic duels, flying sequences, whimsical sets, and quirky characters. But at the same time, it subverts a lot of those ideas. For example, Peter Pan isn't a hero anymore. He's a selfish, distracted adult who abandoned his past. Neverland isn't all like fun and games. It's chaotic, violent, and full of inner conflict. Captain Hook is less of a one-dimensional villain and more of a theatrical, almost Shakespearean figure obsessed with legacy and meaning. The Lost Boys aren't just cute sidekicks. They're a tribe that has to train Peter to believe in himself again, and they're skeptical of him. This blending and bending of genre expectations is part of what makes Hook so interesting, but it also explains why some people were thrown off by it. If you went in expecting a swashbuckling kids movie, you got that kind of. But you also got this surprisingly introspective story about memory, regret, and the fear of becoming emotionally numb. Even the tone swings wildly between silly slapstick and deep emotional moments. One minute, you've got food fights and Tinkerbell tossing Peter around in a dollhouse, and the next, you've got scenes of his son crying because his dad forgot his baseball game. That's a hard balance to strike, and not everyone agrees on whether the movie pulled it off, but it's all part of that strange genre fusion that makes Hook feel unlike almost anything else from that era. And let's not forget the theatricality of it all. Hook doesn't try to look real. Neverland is clearly built on a soundstage, but in a good way. It feels designed, stylized, like you've stepped into a pop-up storybook. This ties into that old-school fantasy vibe where the world isn't gritty or realistic. It's heightened, emotional, symbolic. Spielberg leaned into that, deliberately, drawing from stage plays and storybook illustrations to make Neverland feel both familiar and dreamlike. So to sum it all up, Hook is a weird little genre beast. It starts as a fantasy adventure, dips into drama, and sneaks in some comedy and emotional healing along the way. It's influenced by Barry's original work, Spielberg's earlier films, classic fantasy cinema, and even modern psychological storytelling. But above all, it tries to do something rare. Take a beloved childhood story and ask what happens after the happily ever after. Whether that genre experiment totally works or not, that's a discussion we'll keep unraveling as we go deeper. But there's no denying that Hook isn't afraid to color outside the lines. The story behind how Hook came to life is almost as layered and emotional as the movie itself. It went through decades of evolution, creative shifts, multiple writers, and even a change in tone before it finally hit the screen. And honestly, understanding how this movie was developed helps make sense of why it feels so unique and at times a little uneven. So let's rewind a bit. The idea of telling a story about an adult Peter Pan actually goes all the way back to the early 1980s, and it wasn't originally a Steven Spielberg project. In fact, Spielberg was once set to direct a traditional Peter Pan film with Disney in the early 80s, but he eventually walked away from it because he had just become a father. He reportedly said that he didn't want to make a movie about a lost boy who didn't want to grow up while he himself was learning the beauty of watching his kids grow up. That sentiment would actually become the heart of Hook years later. But at that time, he just wasn't ready. Instead, the project started brewing at TreeStar Pictures, and it was first conceptualized by James V. Hart, a screenwriter who pitched a what-if scenario. What if Peter Pan grew up and forgot everything? What if Neverland wasn't a distant memory but a lost part of himself he had to rediscover? It was a bold twist on J.M. Barrie's original idea, and Hart was inspired in part by his own experiences as a father, watching his kids lose their sense of wonder as they aged. So, right from the beginning, the script wasn't just about fantasy. It was about growing up, losing your imagination, and finding it again through love and family. Hart's version of the story was intended to be more psychological and character-driven, almost like a fantasy-tinged drama. That emotional core mostly stayed intact through the many versions of the script, though the tone did shift as new people came on board. After the project changed hands a few times, Nick Castle, the guy who actually played Michael Myers in the original Halloween, was attached as director. He was also a filmmaker, and for a brief time, Hook was supposed to be his project. Castle worked on developing the script and casting, and he even got Robin Williams interested in playing the lead. But once Steven Spielberg officially joined in the late 80s, Castle stepped aside, and the movie shifted into something much bigger. Spielberg brought in his frequent collaborators to help shape the film into the version we now know. Malia Scotch-Marmo came on board as a screenwriter to rework the script, and she focused on strengthening the emotional arcs, especially between Peter and his children. The original drafts were more focused on the action and mythology of Neverland, but Marmo pushed the movie more toward its family and identity themes, and you can really feel that in the final cut. What's interesting is that even though Spielberg came in with his own vision, he actually tried to honor Hart's original ideas. The notion that Hook isn't just a sequel, but a meditation on what Peter Pan means in adult life still sits at the movie center. You can tell the filmmakers were deeply interested in the psychological side of the story. They weren't just making a flashy action movie. They were asking, what happens to your imagination when you're stuck in boardrooms and business deals? And what kind of man forgets he used to fly? From a structural perspective, the script has a pretty clear 3-act layout, with a slow burn first act that grounds us in Peter Banning's adult life, a vibrant middle act that immerses us in Neverland, and a final act that builds to emotional and action-based resolution. But within that structure, the tone jumps around quite a bit, and that's likely a result of the script being reworked by multiple voices. You've got serious emotional beats sitting right next to food fights and slapstick gags, and honestly, that tonal imbalance is one of the things critics pointed out when the movie first came out. Still, there's a certain ambition in that script that deserves credit. The screenwriters didn't just rely on nostalgia. They tried to add new layers to familiar characters. For example, Peter is no longer the carefree boy hero. He's a lost man trying to reconnect with himself. Hook isn't just evil. He's bored, theatrical, and obsessed with legacy. He wants meaning, not just a fight. Tinkerbell isn't a jealous fairy anymore. She's a lonely character who's clinging to her past with Peter. Wendy, who used to be the girl dreaming of Peter, is now a grandmother who's had to move on without him. These changes were risky. They mess with the mythos, but they also humanize the fantasy, which was the goal from the beginning. Another thing worth pointing out is that Hook includes a lot of visual storytelling ideas that had to be embedded right into the script. For example, the idea that Peter literally forgets how to fly because he forgot his happy thought. That's not just a magical rule, it's a metaphor for emotional disconnection. The idea that you need joy and love to reclaim who you were, that's deeply tied into the writing, and it makes the film hit harder than a simple rescue the kids plot. The dialogue itself is full of moments where character motivation and theme collide. Take Peter's frustrated line early on when he yells at his kids, "I'm not a pirate, I'm a lawyer." That one line says everything. He's a man who traded imagination for control, wonder for spreadsheets. And later in Neverland, you get those emotionally charged moments with his son, Jack, who feels abandoned by his dad. The writing doesn't pull punches in those scenes. It goes straight for the emotional gut. Of course, the script has its weaknesses too. There are moments that feel too on the nose, especially with some of the Lost Boys dialogue and certain plot elements like the speed at which Peter regains his powers or the slightly rushed resolution feel like the result of studio pressure or last-minute rewrites. There's even been talk over the years that Spielberg wasn't fully satisfied with the script during filming and that some scenes were improvised or altered on set. That's not unusual in big productions, but it does show in a few moments where the pacing or logic feels a bit off. Still, the foundation of Hook, the idea of rediscovering yourself through the lens of your forgotten past, is a powerful one, and it comes from a place of emotional truth. James V. Hart once said that he based the story on watching his own son grow up too fast, and he wanted to remind people that it's okay to be a grown-up and still dream. In the end, Hook's writing process reflects what the movie is about, the tension between childhood wonder and adult reality. It's messy, emotional, filled with both joy and frustration. And like Peter himself, the script had to go through a journey of remembering what it was trying to be. Let's be real. When you hear that Hook was directed by Steven Spielberg, it immediately raises expectations. This is the guy who redefined blockbuster film with Jaws, E.T., Indiana Jones, and Close Encounters. He's known for making movies that balance spectacle with genuine human emotion. So going into Hook, you'd expect something magical, maybe even profound. And in many ways, Spielberg delivered that, but not without a few creative conflicts along the way. To really understand Spielberg's direction in Hook, you have to know where he was at personally and professionally when he took this on. He was in his early 40s, already a legend, but also a new father. He just had his son Max and was entering a new phase of his life, one where being a dad and being a filmmaker started to overlap in big ways. And you can totally feel that in Hook. This isn't just a story about Peter Pan, it's a story about fatherhood, responsibility, and the emotional cost of growing up and losing touch with the things that once made you feel alive. Spielberg has even admitted in interviews that he wasn't fully confident during the making of Hook. He struggled with how stylized and theatrical it needed to be. He later said he didn't know how to create the world of Neverland in a way that felt authentic to him, and that sense of discomfort kind of lingers in the film. That's not to say it fails, not at all, but there is a noticeable push and pull between the big, over-the-top fantasy world and the quieter emotional beats he's known for. Now, if you look at how Spielberg normally directs, he loves to root everything in emotional clarity. Even in big, chaotic step pieces, you always know how the characters are feeling. And Hook has moments like that, like the scene where Peter finally remembers being Pan, and he's flooded with memories of his childhood. Spielberg leans into close-ups, warm lighting, and swelling music. You can feel Peter's joy, his heartbreak, and his rediscovery all in one moment. It's classic Spielberg. No fancy tricks, just raw emotional power. But then there are other scenes like the Lost Boys food fight or the pirate baseball game that feel more like elaborate stage productions than grounded storytelling. The colors are turned up to 11. The performances are big and exaggerated, and everything feels surreal, almost like a musical without the singing. Spielberg went full theatrical here. And while some viewers love that boldness, others find it a bit overwhelming. One thing Spielberg did nail, though, is tone. Management, or at least he gave it his best shot. Balancing childlike wonder with adult emotions is incredibly tricky. And while Hook wobbles at times, it never completely collapses under the weight of its own ambition. The tone shifts between goofy slapstick, heartfelt drama, and dark reflective moments, but Spielberg makes sure the emotional through-in stays intact. Even in the most chaotic scenes, you can usually track Peter's internal journey. And let's talk about the pacing, because this is where opinions really split. Hook isn't a short movie. It clocks in at over 2 hours, and some critics felt it dragged, especially in the middle. But that pacing was intentional. Spielberg gives Peter time to reconnect with his past. He doesn't rush the transformation. In fact, the whole point is that Peter has to struggle. He has to fail, be humiliated, be laughed at by the Lost Boys. It's only when he earns their respect and remembers who he used to be that he's allowed to fly again, both literally and metaphorically. That kind of character-focused pacing is something Spielberg has always excelled at. Look at E.T. or The Color Purple. He's not afraid to let characters breathe and change slowly. With Hook, he tried to apply that same logic to a fantasy movie, which was a bold move. Did it always work? Not perfectly, but it was a risk rooted in genuine emotional storytelling. Visually, Hook is like stepping into a dream. Spielberg and his production team, especially production designer Norman Garwood, made a choice to build every part of Neverland on giant sound stages. No location shooting, no green screens. This was pre-GI after all. Everything was built physically, from the pirate ships to the Lost Boys hideout. That's why the world feels so big, detailed, and weirdly fake, but in a good way, like a stage play you can walk around inside. This ties into Spielberg's creative vision. He wanted Neverland to feel like a child's imagination brought to life. Not realistic, but emotionally real. You've got rainbow-colored food, bizarre costumes, and a skyline that looks like a painted backdrop. It's not supposed to feel like a real place. It's a memory, a fantasy, a metaphor. And honestly, that creative decision is what gives Hook its unique visual signature. One of the most Spielbergian elements in Hook is the way he treats family and emotional reconciliation. You can draw a straight line from Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where a man is torn between his obsession and his family, to E.T., where a boy finds connection through an alien, to Hook, where a father realizes he's become the very thing he once fought against. Peter Banning is a man who's forgotten his children, and Spielberg doesn't shy away from making that uncomfortable. There are scenes like the heartbreaking dinner moment when Jack says, "He's not my dad," that feel painfully honest. Spielberg makes you sit in that pain before offering any kind of redemption. Now, in terms of directorial trademarks, you'll find a bunch here. Children looking up in awe. Spielberg loves this shot, and we get it a few times, especially when Peter flies. Again, lens flares and soft lighting, particularly in the more emotional or magical moments. Long takes that follow emotional reactions, like when Peter starts to remember his past, and the camera just holds on his face as the realization washes over him. Mothers and absent parents. This is a recurring theme in Spielberg's work, and in Hook, Peter's absence as a father is the emotional core of the film. But here's the twist. Even though Hook is very Spielberg in its themes and moments, he has said in interviews that it's one of the few movies he's not fully happy with. That's kind of wild considering how deeply personal the story is. He's admitted that he felt overwhelmed by the size of the production and that he couldn't quite crack the tone of Neverland in the way he wanted. Some scenes feel like he was trying too hard to entertain kids, while others dive deep into emotional territory that might have been too heavy for younger viewers. That imbalance, it reflects his own inner tug-of-war during filming. Still, despite his regrets, Hook has become a beloved classic for a lot of people. And honestly, that's partly because of Spielberg's direction, not in spite of. Even when he's unsure, even when the tone wobbles, you can feel his heart in every frame. He didn't phone it in. He tried to make something meaningful, nostalgic, magical, and deeply personal, all at once. That's not an easy thing to pull off, but he gave it everything. In the end, Spielberg's direction in Hook is both ambitious and conflicted. It's filled with moments of brilliance, emotional honesty, and bold stylistic choices. And even if it doesn't fully come together in a traditional sense, it's hard not to respect the vision behind it. Because ultimately, Hook isn't just about Peter Pan. It's about Spielberg, the father, the dreamer, the man trying to hold on to wonder in a world that keeps asking him to grow up. If Hook succeeds at anything beyond this nostalgic visuals and grand ambition, it's because of its cast. This movie lives and breathes through the personalities on screen, and Spielberg knew it. The casting of Hook was critical in grounding such a fantastical story in genuine emotional stakes. And whether you love or hate this movie, there's no denying that the performances add weight, humor, and heart to what could have easily become a cartoonish mess. Let's start with the central force of the film. Robin Williams as Peter Pan. This is arguably one of the most surprising casting choices of the early 90s. At the time, Robin Williams was known for his manic energy, improvisational comedy, and larger-than-life characters. You knew him from Good Morning Vietnam, Dead Poet, Society, and Aladdin soon after. So casting him as a buttoned-up corporate lawyer who has to rediscover his inner child, that was brilliant. It plays directly against type, and that's why it works so well. Williams brings a genuine sense of frustration, confusion, and even sadness to the role of Peter Banning. In the early parts of the movie, he's not remotely likable, and that's intentional. He's uptight, distant, dismissive of his children, and obsessed with work. But slowly, as Neverland strips away his adult defenses, we start to see hints of the Peter Pan we all know. That sparkle in the eye, the boyish grin, the infectious laughter. Williams transitions beautifully from cold to chaotic, from lawyer to legend. His physical performance, especially once he embraces being Pan again, is energetic without feeling over the top. There's a weight to it, like even his flying feels emotional, not just magical. And of course, Robin Williams' ability to tap into childlike wonder is unmatched. He sells the transformation with sincerity, making the fantasy feel earned. You believe this guy used to be Pan, and you believe he had to forget in order to grow up. But the cost of that forgetting is what drives the movie's emotional core. And yes, he's hilarious too. Even in his quieter moments, his comedic timing is impeccable. But what makes this performance special is its restraint. This is Robin Williams with the volume turned down until it needs to go up. Dustin Hoffman as Captain Hook. Dustin Hoffman is a revelation here. He goes full camp, but he never makes Hook walk a joke. That's the fine line he walks so masterfully. Hoffman's Hook is flamboyant, vain, sadistic, insecure, charming, and just a little bit pathetic. All at the same time. He's not just a villain, he's a character complete with personal demons and emotional contradictions. His posh British accent, sweeping gestures, and carefully coiffed hair all scream theater. But what grounds the performance is his desperation. Not just to defeat Peter, but to matter. He wants to be feared, remembered, adored. His scenes with Jack, Peter's son, are almost unsettling in their emotional manipulation. But they also reveal a deeper loneliness in Hook. He wants a family in some twisted way. He wants connection. And when Peter returns, he's thrilled, not because of revenge, but because it gives his life meaning again. That's tragic and oddly relatable. Also, Hoffman reportedly had the time of his life making this movie. He stayed in character between takes, helped shape the rhythm of the pirate scenes, and played off of Bob Hoskins' Smile with pitch-perfect timing. He's theatrical, yes, but in a way that elevates the film's fantasy rather than drowning it in silliness. Julia Roberts. As Tinkerbell, Julia Roberts was at the peak of her career when Hook came out. fresh off Pretty Woman with the world at her feet. Casting her as Tinkerbell made commercial sense, but it's one of the more debated decisions in the film. On paper, it's clever. Roberts has the charm, the beauty, the mischief, but in practice, a performance feels strained. That's not entirely her fault. She was famously going through personal issues during filming, a messy breakup, media, scrutiny, and Spielberg himself has admitted their working relationship wasn't ideal. Most of her scenes were shot in isolation on a green screen because she had to be scaled down in post-production, and that isolation kind of shows. Her performance feels disconnected from the rest of the cast. There's not a lot of chemistry between her and Williams because they were rarely in the same space. That said, Roberts does have moments of emotional honesty, especially when Tinkerbell confesses her love for Peter. It's subtle, heartbreaking, and surprisingly mature. You get the sense that Tink has loved Peter for a long time in silence, watching him grow up and forget her. That pain is something Roberts conveys well, even if the rest of the performance is a bit uneven. Bob Hoskins as Smye. Bob Hoskins steals scenes as Mr. Smohook's right-hand man in comic. Hoskins plays him with a delightful mix of Cockney charm, cluelessness, and weird maternal energy. He's like a pirate nanny and a sleazy sidekick rolled into one. The brilliance of Hoskins is that he never winks at the audience. He plays Smye earnestly, which makes the humor land even harder. Smye isn't just a lackey. He's Hook's therapist, housekeeper, and emotional support system. Their dynamic is gold. You can tell they've been stuck in this toxic, codependent relationship for years. It's hilarious and kind of sad. Fun fact, Hoskins reportedly stayed in character offset too, constantly joking, with crew members as Smye. It added a layer of consistency to the performance that makes him one of the most memorable characters in the movie, even though he's not central to the plot. Maggie Smith as Granny Wendy. Maggie Smith brings such gravitas to her role as the now elderly Wendy Darling. She appears early in the film and sets the emotional. She's not in a ton of scenes, but when she is, you feel her presence. Her eyes are filled with history. Her voice carries regret and warmth. She represents the link between Peter's past and present, and Smith plays it with quiet power. One of the most haunting scenes in the film is when Wendy gently reminds Peter of who he used to be. There's a flicker of heartbreak in her delivery because she's not just mourning Peter's transformation, she's mourning everyone's lost youth. It's beautifully played. Also, Maggie Smith was only in her 50s when she filmed this, but the makeup and her performance were so convincing that many audiences assumed she was really 80 plus. The Lost Boys, led by Dante Basco as Rufio. The casting of The Lost Boys was crucial, and Spielberg went out of his way to find diverse, energetic, and distinctive young actors. These weren't just random child extras. Each Lost Boy has a personality and visual identity. Some have skateboards, some wear war paint, some are covered in armor made of junkyard parts. It's chaotic and joyful. But the standout without question is Dante Basco as Rufio. He's the new Pan, the alpha of the Lost Boys. Basco brings real edge and attitude to the role, making Rufio both a rival and eventual ally to Peter. His arc is surprisingly emotional. He starts off cocky and dismissive, but slowly comes to admire Peter, and his death near the end hits harder than you'd expect for a supporting character. Basso's performance helped Rufio become a cult icon, and he still gets recognized for the role decades later. Charlie Korsmo and Amber Scott as Jack and Maggie. Child actors can make or break a movie like this. Luckily, Hook cast wisely. Charlie Korsmo plays Jack, Peter's son, with a mix of anger and vulnerability. You believe his back. Disappointment. You believe his slow fall under Hook's manipulation. His scenes carry real weight, especially when he throws the baseball to Hook instead of his dad. That's betrayal on a child's level, and Corso plays it perfectly. Amber Scott, who plays Maggie, has less screen time but brings a sweetness and sincerity to the role. Her lullaby is hauntingly beautiful and one of the few moments where time seems to stop in Neverland. Together, the two kids serve as Peter's emotional anchor, the reason he must change. Final thoughts on casting. The magic of Hook's cast is that nearly every role, big or that small, is played with sincerity. Nobody's phoning it in, even in the most absurd moments. The actors believe in the world they're in. That's what keeps the film from collapsing under its own weight. Whether it's Robin Williams' emotional arc, Dustin Hoffman's theatrical villain, or Bob Hoskins' pitch, perfect comedy. Every performance adds flavor, heart, or weirdness that sticks with you. The ensemble doesn't just support the story, they are the story. Their chemistry, energy, and individual quirks are what make Hook more than just a dusty Peter Pan sequel. They make it a living, breathing, chaotic, beautiful mess of a film, and that's exactly what it needed to be. Let's talk casting. Because if Hook didn't have this specific group of actors, especially Robin Williams and Dustin Hoffman, I honestly don't think it would have had the same heart, humor, or emotional impact. The performances in this movie are what really lift it from just a fun Peter Pan sequel into something that sticks with you. It's a blend of quirky, emotional, and straight-up theatrical acting that manages to work because everyone seems to be playing their roles with absolute commitment. Robin Williams as Peter Banning, Peter Pan. Casting. Robin Williams as a grown-up Peter Pan is probably one of the smartest decisions in film history. At first glance, it might seem like an odd fit. Peter Pan is traditionally this boy who refuses to grow up, full of mischief and lightness. But in Hook, we meet him as Peter Banning, a corporate lawyer, kind of a workaholic, a little uptight, and honestly kind of a jerk to his kids. That's a hard transition to make believable, and yet Robin Williams pulls it off. He starts the film being cold and disconnected. He yells at his kids, talks in boring business speak, and doesn't even know how to have fun anymore. But as the story goes on, and Peter gets pulled back into Neverland, Williams begins to loosen up. You see him shift physically and emotionally. His voice gets lighter, his posture changes, and you start seeing flashes of that boyish magic underneath all the stress and wrinkles. By the time he becomes Peter Pan again, fully and confidently, it's such a satisfying moment. Robin brings this wide-eyed wonder to the role that feels genuine. And because it's Robin Williams, he adds layers, humor, payos, and a bit of chaos. He's constantly improvising little moments, throwing in those zingers, and yet when it gets serious, like the scene where he remembers being a father or when he decides to go back home, he delivers those emotional beats with real weight. Dustin Hoffman is Captain Hook. If Robin Williams brought heart, Dustin Hoffman brought theatrical flair. His version of Captain Hook is over the top, in the best way possible. He's dramatic, flamboyant, insecure, and just a little bit ridiculous. But somehow he makes it work. Hoffman is completely unrecognizable under the wig, mustache, and makeup. He disappears into the role. His accent is this mix of British high society and pirate nonsense, and his physical gestures are huge, sweeping arms, exaggerated facial expressions. He plays Hook like he's doing a stage play for a huge audience, but instead of it feeling too big, it actually fits the world of Neverland perfectly. What's even more interesting is how Hoffman adds depth to Hook. Yes, he's the villain, but there's a sadness underneath. You can see it in the way he talks about Peter forgetting him, about being lonely and wanting a kind of purpose. There's even a weird moment where he tries to become a father figure to Peter's son, Jack, which could have felt creepy, but instead comes off as pathetic in a way, like Hook just wants to be remembered to be someone's everything. That's a layer you don't normally get in a kids' movie villain. Also, the chemistry between Williams and Hoffman is gold. Every time they're on screen together, the energy crackles. It's like watching two actors with totally different styles, improv versus stage drama, bounce off each other in real time. Julia Roberts is Tinkerbell. So here's where things get a little complicated. Julia Roberts was already a massive star by 1991, thanks to Pretty Nap Woman. Casting her as Tinkerbell seemed like a big splashy choice. And visually, It works. She's got this pixie haircut, expressive face, and a certain spark that fits the role. She also adds a more grounded, mature layer to Tink, especially since in this version, she's not just jealous of Wendy, she's in love with Peter. However, her performance has always been a bit polarizing. Some people feel like she phoned it in. Others argue that she was limited by how the character was written and filmed. After all, she spent most of the movie acting alone on a green screen, not interacting with any other actors in real time. That's not easy. That said, she still has a few emotional moments that work well. Her transformation into human size, her teary confession of love, and that last look she gives Peter before he leaves Neverland. All of it adds depth to a character that's usually pretty one-note in other adaptations. It might not be her strongest role, but it's memorable. Bob Hoskins as Smythe. Let's take a moment to appreciate Bob Hoskins as SME, the most lovable pirate. Sidekick ever. He's basically the comic relief, but he plays it with so much heart that he becomes kind of endearing. Hoskins balances the bumbling fool act with genuine loyalty to Hook. He's also the guy who has to talk Hook off emotional ledges more than once, almost like his therapist in pirate form. There's a great moment when Hook is feeling down and says he's going to commit suicide, and Smythe tries to talk him out of it, but in this bumbling, barely holding it together kind of way. It's weirdly funny and sad at the same. And Hoskins nails that tone. He gives the character more than just slapstick. He makes me feel real. The kids, Charlie Carorsmo and Amber Scott. Charlie Carorsmo, who plays Jack, Peter's son, is a standout in a role that's more layered than it first appears. At the beginning, he's frustrated with his dad. They don't connect and Jack feels ignored. Carorsmo captures that sulky, hurt, but still hoping vibe perfectly. And when Hook starts manipulating him, you can see the emotional tug-of-war happening on his face. His performance adds a lot to the emotional arc of the movie, especially that final moment when Peter finally remembers how to be a dad. Amber, Scott as Maggie, Peter's daughter, doesn't get as much screen time, but she has one moment that really hits when she sings a lullaby in Hook's pirate ship. That soft, sad moment, this little voice, among all the pirate chaos, actually becomes one of the most touching scenes in the film. It's simple but heartfelt. The Lost Boys. Casting the Lost Boys was no small task. There are so many of them, and each needed to have a distinct personality. From Rufio, played by Dante Bosso, with his red mohawk and attitude, to the chubby and sweet Thudbutt, to the quiet, wise kid who believes in Peter before anyone else. Each actor gives their character just enough edge or warmth to make them stick. Dante Basco, as Rufio, deserves special attention. He's the cool kid, the new Pan, while Peter was away, and you really feel the tension between him and Williams. Their eventual bond is one of the best arcs in the movie when Rufio says, "You are the Pan." It's this huge moment of respect. And his fate later in the story, well, it hits harder than you'd expect for a kid's movie. Final thoughts on performances. Overall, Hook lives or dies by its cast, and thankfully, everyone showed up ready to play. Whether it's the emotional weight Robin Williams brings to Peter's arc, Dustin Hoffman's gloriously theatrical Hook, or the Lost Boys' chaotic energy, the performances carry the movie through its slower or more whimsical parts. Every actor commits, and because of that, the fantasy feels real. The casting was bold, sometimes a bit strange, but it worked. And even if the movie wasn't perfect in critics' eyes, it's the performances that most people remember years later. There's a reason these characters, especially Williams' Pan and Hoffman's Hook, have become iconic. They gave it everything. If you could step into a storybook, one bursting with color, imagination, and the slightly off-kilter magic of childhood, it would probably look a lot like Hook. The film's visual language is absolutely key to its identity. Cinematographer Dean Cundey, known for his work on films like Back to the Future and Jurassic Park, brings Spielberg's ambitious vision to life with sweeping camera moves, lush lighting, and a richly textured aesthetic that turns Neverland into a physical living world. But Hook's Cinematography is more than just pretty pictures. It helps underscore the film's central themes. The contrast between adult responsibility and childlike wonder, the tension between memory and imagination, and the emotional arc of Peter Banning rediscovering who he really is. Let's dig into how that's been done visually. The real world, cold, rigid, and monochrome. The film opens not in Neverland, but in modern-day San Francisco. This setting is filmed in a very intentional way. The color palette here is subdued, lots of grays, blues, and beige tones. Everything feels structured, almost sterile. Dean Cundey uses tight framing and straight static shots to emphasize the suffocating nature of Peter Banning's world. He's boxed in by cubicles, skyscrapers, phone calls, and responsibilities. Even the lighting plays into this idea. It's flat and uninspiring. The office scenes, for instance, feel drained of life. Spielberg uses shallow depth of field to isolate characters within their surroundings. Like when Peter's on the phone at his kid's school play, he's in focus, but the colorful chaos of childhood around him is blurred, almost like he's disconnected from it entirely. Cundey's visual style helps us feel what Peter feels, overwhelmed, lost, and totally out of touch with the world he used to know. And when you contrast this with what's to come in Neverland, it makes the transition even more striking. The transition to Neverland, a shift in color, tone, and movement. The moment Peter arrives in Neverland, the cinematography shifts gears completely. We go from harsh, fitty lighting to soft, golden hues. The camera becomes more fluid, more playful. The framing loosens up. Suddenly, we're getting wide shots, sweeping crane movements, and more dynamic angles. It's like the camera itself is rediscovering joy alongside Peter. Color becomes a huge part of the visual storytelling. Neverland is awash in vibrant primary colors, deep reds, lush greens, ocean blues. Every set looks hand-built and textured. It doesn't feel like CGI or a matte painting. It feels tangible, like you could reach out and touch it. The Lost Boys hideout is especially impressive, a sort of tree fort meets skate park hybrid that looks both dangerous and fun. It's chaotic, cluttered, and creative. Just like the kids who live there, the pirate town is equally intricate, though it has a darker, greer tone. There's a steampunk-esque feel to Hook's ship and surroundings, gears, brass, and lots of candlelight. This gives Hook's world a sense of theatricality and decay, which mirrors his emotional state. Flamboyant, but kind of falling apart. Light as emotion. Cinematography supporting the character arc. Lighting in Hook often mirrors Peter's internal journey. When he first arrives in Neverland, he's often lit from above or behind, casting him in shadow, a man lost in an unfamiliar world. But as he begins to reconnect with his past and his imagination, the lighting gets warmer and more direct. When he finally remembers who he is, the real Peter Pan, the scene is practically glowing. It's not just visual flair, it's symbolic of emotional awakening. One of the most effective uses of lighting comes during Peter's flashback sequence, when he remembers his childhood, his flight from his family, and ultimately why he chose to grow up. The scene is bathed in soft, nostalgic light, almost like an old photograph. There's a deliberate fuzziness to it, reinforcing that we're dipping into memory. The contrast between this and the harsher lighting of the present day is powerful. And let's not forget the use of silhouette and shadow. Peter's final transformation into Pan is staged with dramatic backlighting, casting his shadow high across the pirate ship's sail, a call back to the original Peter Pan story, where shadows symbolize identity and lost innocence. It's cinematic storytelling that uses light to say something deeper. Camera movement and composition, dynamic but thematic. Spielberg is famous for his weird shots, those long, unbroken takes that build tension or emotion without cutting away. While Hook doesn't rely on this as heavily as some of his other films, there are moments where the camera's movement feels particularly deliberate. When Peter first enters the Lost Boys camp, the camera dances through tree branches and kids flying by, mimicking the chaos of the environment. It's not just a camera move, it's a storytelling choice. You feel overwhelmed, just like Peter does. Similarly, the film frequently uses low angles when showing Peter from the kid's perspective. At first, he seems like a giant, intimidating, out of place, but as he transforms back into Pan, the angles normalize. The shift in composition subtly reflects the change in how the Lost Boys, and we see him. On the flip side, Captain Hook is often shot in medium or wide, giving him room to perform, because that's what he's always doing. When he's alone, though, the frame closes in. The scene where he talks to Smye about his loneliness is one of the few tight close-ups, and it feels intrusive in a good way. Suddenly, we're seeing the cracks in his performative bravado, set design, costumes, and cinematic texture. While not strictly cinematography, it's impossible to talk about Hook's visual aesthetic without appreciating the set design and costumes, because Dean Cundey's camera clearly loves them. The sets are lush, layered, and theatrical. The Lost Boys' home has rolling skate ramps, giant food fight cables, and handmade contraptions. It's like the world's coolest playground. The pirate town is dirty and cluttered with fishnets hanging from everywhere and extras swarming the background to create a sense of real activity. Costumes pop with color and detail. Hook's elaborate red coat and curly black wig scream for attention, while the Lost Boys dress like they cobbled their outfits together from junkyard treasures and circus props. Even Peter Banning's transformation into Pan is visual. His suit gets shed, his face gets brighter, and eventually we see him in a perfectly tailored green outfit that bridges both the old Pan and the new grown-up version. Visual effects, a mix of old school and magic. In 1991, CGI was still in its infancy, so Hook relies more on that practical effects and set extensions. The flying scenes are clearly wire-based, and while they might look dated to modern viewers, they still carry a certain charm. What matters more is how they're lit and framed. The scenes where Peter takes flight are always bathed in golden light and framed with wide vistas, giving them emotional weight rather than spectacle. The food fight scene, for example, where the Lost Boys and Peter imagine a grand feast, is a masterclass in visual storytelling. At first, the table looks empty. Then, as Peter begins to believe, we cut to a colorful, almost surreal spread of glowing cakes, meats, and fantastical dishes. The camera lingers lovingly on each item like a magical reveal. It's not subtle, but it doesn't have to be. Final thoughts on visual style. Hook might be criticized for being too much. Too many colors, too many sets, too many visual ideas competing for attention. But honestly, that's kind of the point. It's not supposed to look real. It's meant to look like a child's dream. Mashup of memory and fantasy. Dean Cundey's cinematography serves that dream perfectly. The visuals are textured, emotive, and full of intention. Every lighting choice, every camera move, every saturated color tells part of the story. Together, they help transform Hook from a simple sequel idea into a lush, immersive cinematic experience. Whether you're 5 or 55, it's a feast for the eyes and the heart. When people think of Hook, one name looms large over the entire production: Steven Spielberg. As one of the most influential directors in cinematic history, Spielberg's fingerprints are all over this film, in its structure, in its visual tone, in its character work, and in the emotional beats it aims for. But Hook also marks a curious moment in Spielberg's career, one of transition, inner conflict, and perhaps even self-doubt. That complexity is evident in the film's direction. Some parts of it feel like pure Spielberg magic, while others reveal a filmmaker pushing against the boundaries of his own comfort zone. Let's break down Spielberg's approach to Hook. From his choices in tone and pacing to how he handles actors, movement, spectacle, and emotion. Because to truly understand Hook, you have to understand the hands that shaped it. Spielberg's thematic interests and why Hook mattered to him. Spielberg has always been fascinated by themes of childhood, family, memory, and loss. You see it in E.T. Close, Encounters, Empire of the Sun, and even Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. So, Hook, a film about a man who's forgotten his magical past and abandoned his children in the pursuit of adult Success fits snugly into Spielberg's thematic wheelhouse. It's not just a reimagining of Peter Pan. It's an exploration of fatherhood, lost innocence, and the ever-present desire to reconnect with one's true self. But Spielberg later admitted that making Hook was a frustrating experience. He felt unsure of his footing in Neverland, creatively, emotionally, and stylistically. Ironically, this very uncertainty also ends up working in the film's favor at times. Hook is messy and chaotic, but it's also deeply personal and emotionally charged, which reflects a director grappling with big ideas in real time. Direction of actors, emotion first, always. One of Spielberg's greatest strengths as a director has always been his ability to draw out emotionally honest performances, even in the most fantastical settings. Hook is no exception. Take Robin Williams, for instance. Under Spielberg's direction, Williams balances both ends of Peter Banning's personality. The uptight, distracted father and the joyful, mischievous Pan, without ever turning the character into a cartoon. There's real sadness in his early scenes, real confusion and frustration, and then once he begins to rediscover his past, there's a slow build toward exuberance. Williams had the range, but Spielberg provided the frame and tempo. Dustin Hoffman as Captain Hook is another triumph of direction. Hoffman is larger than life, delivering his lines with theatrical flamboyance and controlled insanity. But Spielberg never lets him become a pure clown. There's melancholy under the makeup, an existential sadness that surfaces in quiet moments. It's a risk to let your villain be that vulnerable, but Spielberg leans into it. In fact, some of the most powerful scenes in the movie aren't action sequences, but dialogue between Hook and Smythe, where they reveal their loneliness and fear of obsolescence. Even the children are well-directed. Spielberg has a well-earned reputation for getting great performances from kids. Think E.T. or Jurassic Park. And the Lost Boys in Hook are no exception. They feel spontaneous, energetic, and distinct. The standout, of course, is young Rufio, played by Dante Basco. He could have been just a cool-looking sidekick, but Spielberg gives him real dramatic weight, especially in his final scenes, balancing tone, lightness, darkness, and everything in between. Directing Hook meant walking a tightrope between comedy, fantasy, and tragedy, and Spielberg walks that line with varying degrees of success. The tonal shifts in Hook are bold. One moment we're watching a goofy food fight. The next we're facing a scene about a father confronting the pain of missed time with his children. Spielberg's direction doesn't shy away from these contrasts. He actually embraces them. He treats Neverland not as a fairy tale land of safety, but as a battleground for emotional truth. However, this tonal ambition does create some friction. There are times when the humor feels a bit too zany, especially the slapstick sequences involving pirates, which can undercut the emotional momentum. Spielberg, ever the showman, may have leaned too hard on visual gags in some places, possibly due to his own uncertainty about how far he could push the darker elements in a supposed family. Still, when it works, it really works. The emotional climax, Peter embracing his identity as Pan, confronting Hook and reconnecting with his son, is pure Spielbergian catharsis. It's big, bold, and sentimental in all the best ways, world-viewing through blocking and movement. Spielberg is famous for his shots and intricate blocking, long takes where actors move through spaces in meaningful ways. Hook doesn't use this technique as frequently as some of his other films, but when it does, the result is immersive. For instance, when Peter first arrives in Neverland, Spielberg doesn't just rely on flashy effects to sell the back environment. He uses the actor's movement, the placement of extras, and careful camera choreography to create a sense of organized chaos. You can feel the heat, the humidity, the noise, the confusion, all without cutting rapidly. It makes you believe in Neverland as a real place, not just a soundstage. The Pirate Town sequence, from Peter's arrival to his awkward attempts to rescue his kids, is full of elaborate staging. Spielberg has people moving in and out of frame, action happening in the background, layers upon layers of interaction. It's theatrical almost. like watching a live play, and it makes the setting feel lived in and dynamic. Pacing and structure. A director torn between worlds. One of the biggest critiques of Hook is its pacing. It takes a while to get going. Peter doesn't even arrive in Neverland until well into the first act. The middle section where he trains with the Lost Boys is deliberately drawn out, and while the final battle delivers in terms of excitement, it doesn't quite land with the impact of some of Spielberg's more famous climaxes. But this slower pace isn't necessarily a flaw. It mirrors Peter's own journey. He doesn't rush to change. He fights it, resists. Spielberg takes time to explore that resistance. In doing so, he's directing not just a fantasy film, but a kind of midlife crisis parable. You have to feel Peter's detachment and frustration in order to appreciate the transformation. That said, there are moments where the film could have benefited from tighter editing or a firmer tonal leash. Spielberg himself has said that he sometimes lost control of the film's scope and visual excess. But if you view Hook as a film about embracing chaos and rediscovery, the slightly unwieldy pacing begins to feel intentional, reflective of Peter's inner mess, Spielberg's signature touches. Despite its departures from his usual formula, Hook is still packed with classic Spielbergian direction, the use of reaction shots, especially from children, to sell emotional stakes, warm lighting and lens flares during moments of personal revelation, layered sound design and overlapping dialogue to create a sense of immersion, an earnest, unapologetic emotional core, unafraid of making audiences cry. And of course, John Williams' score, though technically a separate element, is used masterfully by Spielberg to enhance the emotional tone of every scene. He knows exactly when to dial it up and when to let silence speak volumes. Final thoughts on direction. Hook is a movie where Spielberg stretches himself. It's not a war movie, not a sci-fi thriller, not even a classic adventure film. It's a fantasy dramedy built on whimsy, regret, and the ache of aging. And while the film may not be perfect, Spielberg's direction is always intentional. He's not coasting, he's trying, sometimes too hard, sometimes in messy ways, but always with heart. You can feel him wrestling with the idea of growing up, just like Peter, and that vulnerability bleeds into the film's DNA. That's what makes Hook a fascinating piece of Spielberg's filmography. It's not just a story about Peter Pan, it's a story about Steven Spielberg at a turning point in his life and career, using cinema to work through something personal. And isn't that exactly what great directors do? If the visual direction of Hook is like the heartbeat of the film, then the music and sound design are unquestionably its soul. And no one weaves soul into a film quite like John Williams. His score for Hook stands as one of the most emotionally rich, thematically cohesive, and underappreciated soundtracks in his vast library of cinematic masterpieces. The collaboration between Steven Spielberg and John Williams has always been a match made in film heaven, from Jaws to E.T. to Jurassic Park. But Hook represents a slightly different musical direction. Here, Williams wasn't just creating cues for suspense or excitement, he was crafting a musical tapestry that captured nostalgia, loss, wonder, and redemption. And he did it with a blend of sweeping orchestration, intimate melodies, and subtle motifs that stick with you long after the credits roll. Let's dive deep into how music and sound design function in Hook, what they add to the narrative, and why they're so vital to the film's emotional resonance. Thematic undercurrents in the score. The foundation of Williams' score is built around themes, musical motifs that evolve along with the characters. This is classic Williams style. He doesn't just compose background noise. He writes music that mirrors character arcs and narrative beats. Peter's theme, this is arguably the emotional centerpiece of the entire score. It starts off as a wistful, almost melancholic melody that reflects Peter Banning's confusion and emotional distance from his past. But as the story progresses, the theme becomes more confident, more triumphant, blossoming into a full heroic flourish. By the climax, symbolizing Peter's reawakening as Pan, that arc that growth is present entirely within the music. The Lost Boys theme, light, whimsical, and rhythmic. This motif captures the chaotic creative spirit of a Neverland's youth. Williams uses woodwinds, quick percussion, and bouncing melodies to give us that childlike energy. When Peter begins training with the Lost Boys, this theme starts to mesh with his own, musically signaling the reconnection between his adult self and the world he left behind. Hook's theme, a bold theatrical march that blends menace with satire. It's grandiose and pompous, befitting a villain who's as much about appearances as he is about actual danger. Williams balances menace with absurdity, just like Hoffman's performance, showing Hook as someone who's both dangerous and deeply insecure. Family memory motif, a more delicate piano-driven piece that pops up in flashbacks, quiet moments with Peter's children, and scenes with Granny Wendy. This theme is grounded in emotion, memory, and humanity, the heart of the film. It reminds us of what's truly at stake beyond sword fights and pirate ships. These recurring themes allow the audience to track the story emotionally, even when the plot gets chaotic or the tone shifts unexpectedly. It's a musical compass for the viewer, guiding them through Peter's internal journey. Orchestration, magic in every note. Williams employs the full might of a traditional symphony orchestra in Hook, but he uses it with intention. He knows when to go big and when to pull back. Strings dominate much of the emotional scoring, lending the film a rich, sentimental quality. In scenes where Peter begins to remember his childhood, especially the hauntingly beautiful scene where he rediscovers his happy thought, the strings swell in a way that feels like memory itself is coming alive. Brass and percussion are used to dramatic effect during the action sequences. The pirate battle, the sword fight with Rufio, and the climactic duel with Hook. But even in these louder moments, the music never drowns out the emotion. Williams always brings the score back to the characters. Choral arrangements are sprinkled in as well, adding a layer of grandeur and almost mythic resonance to scenes involving Neverland's magic or Peter's transformation. There's something operatic about Peter's rediscovery of self, and the music supports that with spiritual undertones. In many ways, Hook's score feels like a musical play, and that's not surprising considering Hook originally had ambitions to be a full-blown musical. In fact, many of the themes in the score were originally written as songs with lyrics and everything, while the musical concept was eventually abandoned. The DNA of that approach remains in the score structure, with distinct movements that act like musical numbers. Sound design, world building through sound. While John Williams handles the music, Spielberg's sound design team brings Neverland to life through meticulous layering of ambient noise, Foley effects, and dynamic mixing. Neverland isn't just a visual location. It's an auditory experience. The sounds of bustling pirates, clashing swords, creaking ships, tropical birds, and windy cliffs combine to make the environment feel alive. The Lost Boys hideout in particular has a vivid acoustic character. Laughter, footsteps, makeshift wooden contraptions clanking and wheezing. You can hear the improvisation and playfulness in every corner. Hook's ship, the Jolly Roger, sounds imposing with groaning timbers, echoing hallways, and metallic clangs. These auditory cues heighten the drama of each scene without calling attention to themselves. The sword fight scenes, especially the final duel, are mixed with a level of clarity that allows each metallic clang to land with impact while still allowing Williams' score to push the drama forward. And then there are the quiet moments. The gentle creak of a rocking chair, the wind rustling in a London night, the subtle sighs of a child dreaming. Spielberg's sound team knows when to step back and let silence or near silence carry emotional weight. One great example is the flashback sequence of Peter remembering his childhood. The ambient noise drops to almost nothing, giving space for Williams' soft piano theme and Peter's voiceover. It's haunting, dreamlike, and emotionally raw. Music as emotional roadmap. One of the most effective things about Hook's score is how it prepares the viewer emotionally before the characters even speak. Williams uses leitmotif recurring themes in such a way that the viewer feels the emotions ahead of time. When Peter begins to fly for the first time, we hear his theme in full glorious form before he lifts off the ground. That primes the audience to feel joy, anticipation, and release even before the visuals catch up. Conversely, when tragedy strikes like Rufio's death, the score drops to a simple, somber refrain. The lack of musical complexity in these moments feels like an emotional punch, a raw, empty space where the music once soared. This emotional road mapping keeps viewers deeply engaged. Even if they're not consciously analyzing the score, they feel its guidance. That's the magic of Williams. He speaks directly to the heart. Standout tracks worth noting. Several individual pieces from the Hook soundtrack stand out as many masterpieces on their own. Prologue sets up the whimsical yet nostalgic tone of the entire film. Flight to Neverland, a high-energy piece filled with wonder and forward momentum used when Peter is taken to Neverland. You Are the Pan. This is the moment where Peter fully becomes Pan again, triumphant, joyful, soaring, farewell Neverland. A bittersweet track that blends themes of growth, change, and departure. It feels like the ending of a dream. Even outside the context of the film, these pieces are beautiful, but within the film, they're inseparable from the emotion of the scenes. Final thoughts on music and sound design. The score of Hook is more than just beautiful music. It's an emotional storytelling tool that elevates the film beyond its narrative flaws. It's lush, layered, and deeply thematic, wrapping the entire movie in a sense of timeless wonder and longing. Williams doesn't just accompany the story, he tells it right alongside Spielberg. And the sound design, it's what makes Neverland feel real. It's what gives the world texture and resonance. From the tiniest creak of the Jolly Roger to the raucous laughter of the Lost Boys, the soundscape is an unsung hero of this film's immersive quality. Together, music and sound make Hook a story not just seen but felt. Symphony of emotion, nostalgia, and rediscovery. Even if you've outgrown fairy tales, the score whispers a reminder. Deep down, the magic is still there. You just have to listen. Let's be real. Hook would not be half the film it is without its cast. It's one of those movies where performances don't just support the story, they elevate it. The emotional core, the whimsical tone, the comedic beats, and the darker undertones all land because the actors fully commit. Even when the script wanders or the pacing stumbles, the cast is always dialed in, bringing humanity and gravitas to a fantastical story. The performances in Hook strike a unique balance between realism and theatricality. On one hand, you've got larger-than-life characters like Captain Hook and Tinkerbell that demand a kind of stage-like presence. On the other hand, you've got deeply human characters like Peter Banning, Jack, and Granny Wendy who need emotional authenticity. Spielberg lets his actors explore both ends of the spectrum, and the result is a layered, energetic, and surprisingly emotional ensemble. Robin Williams as Peter Banning, Peter Pan. This is arguably one of Robin Williams' most emotionally complex roles, and also one of his most restrained. Known at the time for his manic energy and quick improvisation, Williams dials it back in. The first half of Hook. As Peter Banning, he's cold, corporate, emotionally unavailable. He's not the life of the party. He's the guy missing his own kid's baseball game because of a conference call. And that's what makes his eventual transformation so powerful. Watching Williams rediscover joy, silliness, and imagination over the course of the movie is genuinely moving. His performance physically shifts, his posture loosens, his eyes widen, his voice gains warmth. By the time he's in full Peter Pan mode, he's flying around and laughing with abandon. And it feels earned. It's like watching a man find the pieces of himself he lost to adulthood. Some standout emotional moments. The flashback sequence where he remembers his childhood, holding his infant daughter, and realizing what his happy thought really is. Williams plays it with such tenderness and awe that it hits like a gut punch. The confrontation With Jack, where he apologizes for not being a present father. His sincerity in that scene is heartbreaking. There's no magical music or flying, just raw regret. And love. His final duel with Hook, where he channels both heroism and empathy. He's not just fighting, he's making peace with the past. Williams balances whimsy and pathos like few actors can. He makes you believe that beneath the grumpy lawyer exterior, Peter Pan, the boy who could fly, was always there, just buried. Dustin Hoffman is Captain Hook. Hoffman goes big, really big, and it works. His Hook is operatic, campy, theatrical, and utterly captivating. He doesn't play Hook like a one-not villain. He plays him like a man-performing villain because he needs to feel important. You get the sense that Hook is depressed, lonely, and desperately searching for purpose. Killing Peter Pan is the last thing giving his life meaning. What makes Hoffman's performance great isn't just the flamboyant delivery or the physical presence, it's the underlying sadness. His relationship with SME, more on him in a second, is weirdly codependent. His obsession with Jack stems not just from spite, but from a desire to corrupt and possess what Peter abandoned. It's dark but fascinating. Hoffman's comedic timing is also razor sharp. His tantrum over the baseball game is both hilarious and tragic. His speech to Jack about being unloved plays like a warped bedtime story. Even his line delivery, "Death is the only great adventure," feels Shakespearean in scope. It's a risky performance, veering into caricature at times, but Hoffman never loses control. He is Hook, larger than life, emotionally stunted and gloriously self-absorbed. Maggie Smith is Granny. Wendy. Maggie Smith brings gravitas to what could have been a throwaway role. As an older Wendy Darling, she is the emotional bridge between Neverland and the real world. Her scenes are laced with nostalgia, loss, and longing. Smith plays Wendy as someone who has lived with deep emotional weight. You can see the pain in her eyes when she talks about Peter growing up and forgetting. There's a moment when she looks at adult Peter and whispers, "You're doing it again, forgetting." And it's heartbreaking. She's not just a former adventurer. She's someone who's been waiting decades for a lost friend to come home. Her warmth and elegance ground the film's fantasy elements. Smith makes us believe in the emotional reality of Neverland. Even if it's all in Peter's head, you believe she believes. Julia Roberts is Tinkerbell. This one's a little more divisive. Julia Roberts gives a committed, often endearing performance as Tinkerbell, but she was also heavily criticized at the time, both for being miscast and for behind-the-scenes tension. Despite that, Roberts brings a quiet vulnerability to the role that's easy to overlook. Her best scenes are the emotional ones. When she confesses her love to Peter and transforms into human size for just a moment, Roberts plays it with such restraint and sadness. It's like she knows she's going to lose him again. Her protectiveness over Peter, her frustration at his forgetfulness. Roberts nails the emotional beats, even if the character is physically isolated in most scenes due to visual effects constraints. Some of her line delivery can feel flat, and she doesn't have the manic spark that fans might expect from a Tink, but she does convey a sense of yearning that adds depth to her character. Someone who's been stuck in limbo, waiting for Peter to remember her. Bob Hoskins is Smythe. Bob Hoskins is a total scene stealer. His version of Smythe is not just comic relief. He's Hook's confidant, enabler, and emotional support system. Hoskins gives Smythe a Cockney charm and a bit of streetwise savvy. He's not just bumbling around. He's subtly manipulating Hook, comforting him, and even scheming behind the scenes. The dynamic between Hook and Smythe is weirdly sweet, like an old married couple bickering about how to kill Pan. What makes Hoskins' performance great is that he never overplays it. He's funny without being annoying, loyal without being boring, and he delivers one of the best deadpan lines in the movie. "I've just had an apostrophe." Classic. Charlie Carorsmo as Jack Banning. Child actors are hit or miss, but Charlie Carorsmo is excellent as Jack. He has one of the most emotional arcs in the film, going from a neglected son to a brainwashed pirate to a redeemed believer in his father again. Kurorsmo doesn't play Jack as whiny or overly precocious. He's believable. His pain feels real. When he throws the baseball with Hook and starts calling him Dad, it stings. You get why Jack is angry. Peter has been absent his whole life. The final scene where Jack hugs Peter and says, "My dad is Peter Pan," is one of the most cathartic moments in the movie. Corso delivers it with genuine awe, and it works because he earned that transformation. Supporting cast and Lost Boys. Amber Scott as Maggie, Peter's daughter, is sweet with a beautiful singing voice and soft presence. She doesn't get as much to do as Jack, but adds emotional texture. Dante Bosco as Rufio is iconic. The red hair, the sword, the Bangarang rally. Cries. He plays the rebellious leader with edge and vulnerability, especially when challenged by Peter. His death hits hard because Bosco makes him memorable. And layered. The rest of the Lost Boys are perfectly cast. They each have unique personalities, from Thudbutt to the twins, and their chemistry with Williams makes the Neverland scenes come alive. Final thoughts on acting and performances. Hook is a film where the acting carries so much emotional weight that it often outshines the story itself. Robin Williams gives a transformative performance that blends humor, sadness, and hope. Dustin Hoffman delivers a masterclass in theatrical villain. Maggie Smith, Julia Roberts, and Bob Hoskins round out a cast that feels both fantastical and deeply human. Yes, some of the performances are exaggerated, and yes, some lines don't land perfectly, but overall, this cast sells a story that could have easily collapsed under its own ambition. They make Neverland real. They make Peter Pan's journey believable. And most importantly, they make us care. Not just about the story, but about the characters at the heart of it. That's the magic of Hook. It's not just about flying, it's about feeling. And thanks to this cast, we do. When we talk about Hook and its enduring magic, we can't ignore its visual identity. It's a movie, drenched in theatricality, yet filmed with the grandeur of a Hollywood epic. Cinematographer Dean Kundi, who previously worked on Back to the Future, Jurassic Park, and who framed Roger Rabbit, brings his signature touch here, crafting a film that looks and feels like a storybook come to life. But it's not just about making things look pretty. The cinematography in Hook is purposeful, layered, and thematically rich. Let's explore how Hook uses cinematography and visual style to elevate its storytelling through lighting, color, camera work, production design, and visual metaphors. The look of the real world, stark, cold, and claustrophobic. The first act of Hook takes place in the real world, specifically in San Francisco and later in London. Visually, this part of the film is intentionally bland. The colors are muted, grays, blues, and cooler. Lighting dominate. Kundi uses restrained framing and still boxed-in camera work to emphasize how rigid Peter Banning's life has become. His world is dominated by walls, cubicles, boardrooms, and skyscrapers, all symbolic of his emotional confinement. Lighting here is very controlled and artificial. The fluorescence in Peter's office, the dimly lit plane, even Granny Wendy's house, all feel sterile compared to the explosion of color that comes later in Neverland. Spielberg and Kundi deliberately make the real world feel dull and lifeless, setting up a visual contrast for the fantastical elements to come. Even the way characters are shot reflects this disconnect. Peter is often framed alone or separated from his family by objects like windows, doors, or pieces of furniture. It's visual storytelling at its best. Without saying a word, the cinematography shows us how distant he's become. Lighting and color shift in Neverland. The transition from London to Neverland is one of the film's most visually striking moments. It's like walking from a black and white world into a Technicolor dream. Neverland is bursting with saturated hues, lush greens, glowing reds, deep blues, and lots of golden yellows. The lighting becomes warmer, more expressive. Shadows are softer, and there's an intentional dreamlike quality to everything. The shift in lighting isn't just cosmetic. It tells us we've entered a world ruled by imagination and emotion. Kundai uses backlighting frequently in Neverland, giving many scenes a glow around the characters. Especially Peter and the Lost Boys. It creates this subtle halo effect, making them feel mythic and childlike. This is especially evident in the scenes where Peter starts to remember who he is. Light becomes more magical, symbolic of his awakening. For Tinkerbell, the lighting becomes even more specialized. She's often bathed in shimmering highlights, and her glow is sometimes the only light source in a dark room. There's a softness to her presence, which adds to the bittersweet romance and isolation of her character. The Lost Boys' hideout, a playground of visual imagination. The Lost Boys' hideout is one of the most iconic sets in 90s cinema. Visually, it's a blend of treehouse, junkyard, and fantasy fairground. Kundi's camera glides through this space like it's a living organism. Tracking shots, pans, and low angles show us how vertical and sprawling this space is. It feels limitless. This set is a visual reflection of Peter's repressed imagination. At first, it's chaotic and overwhelming, but as Peter adapts, the cinematography adjusts. The camera becomes more dynamic, playful, and fluid. It zips along with the food fight, sources during the flying scenes, and captures intimacy during quiet emotional beats, like the moment Thudbutt gives Peter the marbles. Color plays a huge role here as well. Every child has a unique look. Bright face, paint, mismatched outfits, quirky accessories. The lighting is theatrical, but never artificial. It all feels tactile, like you could step into the screen and touch it. Captain Hook's ship and Pirate Town, grand, gothic, and theatrical. On the other side of that, Neverland lies Hook's domain, and visually, it's a whole different world. His ship, the Jolly Roger, is designed with almost Baroque levels of detail. Ornate wood carvings, deep red curtains, golden trims, its decadence bordering on rot. The pirate town is drenched in shadows, gaslight-style lamps, and smoky alleyways. It feels like a twisted version of Victorian London mixed with Disneyland's Pirates of the Caribbean ride. The lighting here leans into deep contrast, bright highlights against pitch shadows. Hook is often framed in silhouette or lit from below to make him look more imposing. This is visual storytelling. Again, his world is one of deception, theatricality, and manipulation. It's all artifice, much like his personality. The camera also plays with angles more in these scenes. When Hook is commanding the pirates, the shots are upward, making him feel towering and powerful. When he's sulking or plotting with SME, the angles flatten out or tilt slightly, hinting at the instability underneath. Flight and freedom, camera movement that sources. When Peter finally remembers how to fly, the cinematography lifts with him, literally. Kundai uses crane shots, wire, rigs, and wide-angle lenses to capture the wonder of flight. These moments are high, filmed with a sense of awe and release. The camera floats along with Peter, giving the audience the same sense of freedom he feels. It's one of the few times in the film where the camera breaks from earthly rules. It dips, sways, zooms out to reveal scale. One especially beautiful shot is when Peter flies above the pirate ship at sunset, his silhouette framed by the golden sky, and his shadow reflected in the water below. It's pure visual poetry. A boy, reclaimed, a legend reborn, symbolic framing and visual metaphor. Kundi and Spielberg make great use of visual metaphor throughout Hook. For instance, reflections, mirrors, and water surfaces are often used to hint at Peter's dual identity. In one scene, Peter sees his younger self reflected in a puddle, a literal confrontation with his forgotten past. Shadows, Peter's shadow, famously a recurring motif in the original Peter Pan, is treated with reverence here. It's elusive, mischievous, and ultimately symbolic of Peter's true self, distance. Throughout the first act, Peter is visually distanced from his children. When he finally reconnects, they're framed together in the same close shot, no longer separated by physical or emotional space. These visual choices add depth to what could otherwise be a surface-level fantasy, visual effects, and practical magic. Even though Hook was made in 1991 before the CGI revolution, it relies heavily on practical effects and traditional film magic. And honestly, it holds up surprisingly well. Flying scenes were achieved with a mix of wire work and matte painting backdrops. Tinkerbell, played by a digitally composited Julia Roberts, interacts with real actors in cleverly shot scenes using green screen and scale models. Sure, some shots show their age, but the overall craft is impressive. The decision to build real massive sets instead of relying on blue screens gives the movie a tangible quality that modern CGI-heavy films often lack. You feel the texture of the Gyak pirate ship, the wood of the Lost Boys treehouse, the moss on Neverland's cliffs. The lighting is consistent, the shadows are natural, and the actors are clearly reacting to real environments, not tennis balls on sticks. Final thoughts on cinematography and visual style. The cinematography of Hook is nothing short of enchanting. Dean Cundey doesn't just shoot a fantasy world. He creates a visual arc that mirrors Peter's internal transformation. From cold, boxed-in realism to expansive, saturated wonder, the camera tells its own version of the story. Is it stylized? Absolutely, but that's the point. Hook is a fairy tale filtered through Spielberg's lens of sentimentality and childhood nostalgia, and Cundey matches that vision with a cinematic language that's rich, theatrical, and deeply emotional. Even if some critics felt the story was uneven, few could argue against the film's visual splendor. Hook looks like how childhood feels. A bit chaotic, a lot colorful, and full of wonder if you're willing to look up. And that's the secret. Hook doesn't just want to entertain you. It wants to remind you what it's like to fly, to imagine, to believe. And through its visuals, it does just that. If the heart of Hook lies in its story of rediscovering imagination and the soul is in its vibrant visual world, then its emotional pulse, the thing that makes your chest swell or your eyes water, is undoubtedly John Williams' score. Music in Hook is not just background noise or emotional wallpaper. It is a central character guiding tone, building wonder, reinforcing nostalgia, and subtly cueing the viewer through emotional shifts. In this section, we'll break down how Hook uses music and sound design to enrich the storytelling, build its world, and deliver some of its most powerful emotional moments. John Williams' musical magic. Let's start with the obvious. John Williams is a legend. He's the maestro behind Star Wars, E.T., Jurassic Park, Indiana Jones, Harry Potter. Basically the soundtrack to childhood for multiple generations. With Hook, Williams leans into his whimsical, romantic, and theatrical instincts, crafting a score that feels equal parts operatic and childlike. Interestingly, Hook was originally conceived as a musical in its earliest development stages, and Williams composed much of the score with that in mind. Though the film evolved into a non-musical narrative, the DNA of a musical remains. Through sweeping motifs, light motifs for characters, and richly orchestrated themes. And some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.